Alright, big mouthful. Here we go. That was the one and only sniff this video, I promise. From here on out, it's just going to be dribbling out instead. You just got to deal with that. Good morning, everyone. Sorry for that intro. We are back. We're back in Luke again. We're going to be finishing off chapter 2 today, which is exciting. So quick recap of where we're up to. Jesus is born. Jesus is alive. Hooray. It feels like Christmas, even though it's not, like reading like these sort of narratives. So Jesus is here. It's good. He's been presented at the temple. Mary and Joseph brought him along to the temple where he met a guy called Simeon. And this guy called Simeon had this big prophecy about him that he was going to bring salvation, be a light of revelation for the Gentiles, bring the glory to the people of Israel and all that kind of thing. And there was a lady called Anna as well who was praying and fasting and worshipping, which is really cool. And then they returned to Nazareth, and now we are on to verse 41. Now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of Passover. So immediately, what is the feast of Passover? Well, if you wind all the way back to the Old Testament, there was a period where the Jewish people were slaves in Egypt. If you've seen Prince of Egypt, you'll know the story. And Moses came along and he said to Pharaoh, "Let my people go." Pharaoh didn't. There were a number of plagues that ensued. And the last plague was God sent the spirit of death over Egypt. And if you didn't paint lamb's blood on your door, then your firstborn son would die. And so all the Jewish people painted lamb's blood on their door. They killed a lamb, offered it as a sacrifice, and painted its blood on the door, and the spirit of death passed over them, hence the name Passover. And so to commemorate that, celebrate that, God told the people to put in a feast, a little festival that would happen every year where they would celebrate the fact that God spared them. God brought them out of this land, brought them out of slavery, and had brought them into the promised land. And so that's kind of what the Feast of Passover is about. It's a tradition that the Jewish people continue to celebrate, and Jesus will celebrate later on in his life as well. And when he was 12 years old, Jesus is now 12 years old, we fast forwarded about 12 years, they went according to custom. So they've gone to Jerusalem. Jerusalem's sort of the capital city. It's definitely like the biggest city for the Jewish people. This is the city on a hill. This is the big important city. They've got the temple there, which is the main thing. And when the feast was ended, as they were returning, the boy Jesus stayed in Jerusalem. And so this isn't actually the first time Jesus has been to Jerusalem. The story that we read yesterday where Jesus was presented at the temple, that happened at Jerusalem as well. That was when he was a baby, and now he's back in Jerusalem at the same temple when he's 12 years old. And Jesus stayed behind. His parents is the start of the next sentence, so let's keep reading. His parents did not know it, but supposing him to be in the group, they went a day's journey. But then they began searching for him among their relatives and acquaintances. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem searching for him. So, sorry, that was the second sniff. I promise that's the last one. And so Jesus stays behind in Jerusalem, in the temple. His parents leave. It seems really irresponsible for us today, but you've got to realise they were part of these big families, and these big families would sort of travel and do things together, families and friends. There was safety in numbers for journeying like that. And it was also, it's kind of like, I don't know, it's not like Christmas, but do you know what I mean? It's where it's a big celebration. It's a time where you get together with all your family, friends, and you spend time with all of them. And so they would have been part of quite a big group. And there are definitely times where parents are like, oh, okay, yeah, kids, you run off and have your fun with everyone else, and we'll come get you in the evening. And then they went to find Jesus, and he wasn't there. And so Mary and Joseph returned to Jerusalem, started searching for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple. 3 days is quite a lot of searching. They must have been pretty scared. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. So that's a big model of sort of how Jesus goes throughout all of his life, really. I'd say one of the biggest things that characterises Jesus and the way he talks versus any other figure in the Bible, and most people that you come across really, is the way that he listens and asks questions. When Jesus challenges someone, he doesn't just walk up to them and tell them what is the right answer, tell them what they should believe, tell them what the law should be, tell them what they should say, any of that kind of thing. Jesus will go up to them, he'll ask them a question, a very basic question, they'll explain themselves, and then he'll just ask them several questions and sort of over time get them to kind of undo themselves. We'll see it later on, but Jesus a lot of the time he'll just put in like a subtle question just to challenge someone, or just to and so he was doing this in the temple, but he wasn't like necessarily challenging the leaders of the temple. He was probably more asking questions genuinely to learn things. But it's interesting that Jesus is, Son of God, and he comes down to earth and he sits down, he asks questions, and he listens to what people have to say. I think that's so cool. It's so cool that we've got a God like that who wants to, engage with us like that. It's really, really cool. All who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. So, this 12-year-old kid is also, he's picking up a lot and he's giving some answers himself. And, the people around him are like, whoa, this kid's good. And when his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us so? Behold, your father and I have been searching for you in great distress." And he said to them, "Why were you looking for me? Did you not know I must be in my father's house?" Like I said, he answers with questions a lot of the time. Did you not know I would be in my father's house? Is really fascinating. I think you get a sense, especially later in this next bit, that Jesus does sort of empathise with the stress and the worry that his mother had, but equally he's like, I was with God. I've been in the temple. I've been spending time with God. I've been learning. I've been doing this good stuff. You don't have to worry about me, because this is my calling. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. And they did not understand the saying that he spoke to them. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth, and he was submissive to them. So that's what I was saying. With I think 12-year-old Jesus kind of got the stress that he put them under because he was submissive. By saying that he was submissive to them, this account's very clear that Jesus wasn't like kicking off or being disobedient or being an annoying kid. He totally understood why they were stressed, but I think he was sort of challenging them on it and being like, look, if I'm in the temple, you've got nothing to worry about. If I'm with God, you've got nothing to worry about. And that's something you see with Jesus sort of saying and doing throughout is, if you've got a God on your side, why are you afraid? It happens later on when he's in the boat with some disciples in the middle of a storm, and the disciples are terrified and they're saying, Jesus, what are we doing? And Jesus is like, look, we've got God with us, it's fine. Why are you stressing? Why are you scared? And he just calms the storm like that. And this sort of feels to me like a precursor of that kind of thing. And his mother treasured up all these things in her heart. So again, we see that. We've had that phrase repeated so many times that Mary's treasured up these things in her heart. One of the theories around that is perhaps that these early accounts of Jesus came from Mary herself, or came from someone close to Mary, because that kind of there's a bit of there could be an implication there that this, she treasured these things up in her heart, and that's why they're in this account, because they have been passed on to Luke either via Mary or by someone close to her, but we don't know. But that's one sort of idea floating around about that. But it also just kind of shows how we should sort of treat God working in the world. We should, because obviously we can't take credit for the things God does, but equally, these things are a massive encouragement, and so it's good to sort of treasure these things up inside yourself, to notice when God acts, and to keep that in yourself. And so whenever things get difficult, you've got this little storehouse of times where God's been really faithful and really good. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favour with God and man. So that's quite an interesting line, because I remember recently for my course at uni, I was looking at Paradise Regained, which was a poem written a few hundred years ago by a guy named John Milton, and he was sort of my essay was about whether he was rewriting the gospel narrative or not to fit his own agendas, because he essentially tells the story of Jesus a few times, in like a few different sort of ways. And one of the things he sort of said was that Jesus couldn't be the Son of God because Jesus learned. And so we're not going to go into that whole debate just yet, but I think it's fascinating that Jesus does learn, because it says he increased in wisdom. So that showed he went from a place of not having as much wisdom to having more wisdom. Which is, yeah, I think that's very cool, because that just points us to the fact that Jesus was human. Which is one of the things we sometimes forget, because we talk about Jesus being the Son of God a lot, and Jesus being God come down, and that's really powerful and really important and really good. But the thing you've got to remember and balance with that is that Jesus was human as well. Jesus went through all the human experiences that we have. You know, he felt temptation, he felt pain, he felt loss, he was in a human body that, you know, did human body things, you know, that struggled, that, you know, could be injured, could be nailed onto a cross. You know, Jesus physically came and suffered. And so I think you just get a first little indication of like, no, Jesus is human in this passage, where it says he increased in wisdom, because it shows that as a kid, you know, he had to learn, he had to speak to people, he had to increase his knowledge, he had to find out things. Yeah. So I thought that was quite cool. But yeah, I guess the main takeaway from this was just going back to sort of, why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house? It's the fact that it's his Father's house, you know. Jesus was a kid who walked in the temple and said, this is my Father's house. And the wonderful thing about the New Testament is that that isn't something that's exclusive to Jesus anymore. That isn't something that Jesus just says. We're all welcomed into that presence with God, and we're all welcomed in as his children, thanks to what Jesus has done for us. We'll see that in more detail later, but it's such an encouragement that when Jesus says, did you not know I must be in my Father's house? That's something that we can say as well. And his Father's house doesn't mean that specific temple in Jerusalem anymore. That his Father's house can mean just sitting in your room and praying. Even in your self-isolation, you can still be in your Father's house, which is really awesome. So yeah, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again tomorrow. Much love.